August 12, 1944, near Sanlo, Normandy. The orchard still smoldered. Thick, black smoke curled upward from the burned-out shells of 3 American tanks. Their hulls split open like crushed cans, the stench of scorched rubber and diesel biting the air. A broken tread lay coiled in the dirt. An American helmet rolled softly in the breeze. Perched atop a German Panzer IV, Oberleutnant Hans von Richter surveyed the wreckage through his field glasses. "Shermans," he muttered flatly. "3 more gone," his gunner snorted. "They never learn. Send in another batch. We'll take them down too." Von Richter gave a thin, self-satisfied nod. The American M4 Sherman had become a running joke among his men. Fast, yes, but poorly armored and lightly armed, compared to Germany's Tigers and Panthers. Easy prey for an 88mm shell. They had long since stopped counting how many they'd destroyed that week alone. Then, something strange. It began as a low hum from the northern ridge, then the heavy growl of tracks. 1 Sherman appeared, then another. 5, 10, a dozen. Out from the hedgerows rolled a fresh column of tanks, new, clean, freshly painted. No burn marks, no battle scars. The white stars on their hulls gleamed under the afternoon sun. Their commanders stood tall in open hatches, scanning calmly. Von Richter froze. "They can't have," he stammered. "We wiped out their forward column just hours ago." His adjutant murmured, "Replacements already?" No one had answers, only questions. It took the German Supply Corps weeks to transport a single tank from the Reich to the front. Yet here the Americans were, replacing destroyed armor by nightfall. Von Richter lowered his binoculars. The arrogance drained from his face. "This isn't possible," he whispered, disbelieving. "It's not humanly possible, but it was. And it was only the beginning." March 1944, Fort Knox, Kentucky. Before he ever saw combat, Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Anderson saw steel. Rows upon rows of M4 Shermans lined the proving grounds beneath the Kentucky sun. Some gleamed with new paint, others were scarred veterans from North Africa, brought back for study. Anderson was 24, freshly commissioned from Officer Candidate School. Born in Ohio, the son of a machinist, he'd always loved engines, their rhythm, their purpose. But what struck him that summer wasn't just the tanks. It was the pace. Every week, more arrived. Dozens, sometimes hundreds. "We don't build 'em to last forever," one mechanic told him. "We build 'em so the next guy doesn't have to wait." Anderson joined a newly formed armored battalion. They trained hard on dusty lots, live fire drills with support crews, engine swaps in under 3 hours, track repairs under simulated fire. His crew bonded fast. A driver from Chicago, a radio man from Texas, and a loader who had lied about his age to enlist at 16. By early May 1944, Anderson's battalion had finished training and boarded a Liberty ship bound for England. They landed in France just weeks after D-Day, part of the second wave of armored reinforcements preparing to break out from Normandy. Meanwhile, Oberleutnant Hans von Richter entered his 3rd year of war. A hardened veteran of the Eastern Front, he knew what happened when numbers overwhelmed quality. He had watched Soviet T-34s pour from the forests like ants, swarming even the finest tanks Germany could build. The Panther was an engineering masterpiece, but one that demanded downtime, spare parts, and expert mechanics. In France, von Richter expected history to repeat. German armor dominating, American tanks burning. And at first, it did. He destroyed over 20 Shermans in 2 weeks. But they kept coming. Each time his crew annihilated a platoon, more appeared. "They don't retreat," one lieutenant muttered grimly. "They replace." Von Richter began to wonder, how many could the Americans possibly have? The answer would haunt him long after the war. Strategy versus reality. Quality against quantity. At Army Group B headquarters, a junior staff officer once asked Field Marshal Erwin Rommel a blunt question. "Herr Feldmarschall, what do we do about the Sherman? They're weaker than our tanks, but there are too many." Rommel said nothing for a moment. He simply looked out the window at the endless Allied convoys stretching across the French countryside, trucks, jeeps, ambulances, and yes, Shermans, endless Shermans. That was the heart of the problem. German tanks like the Tiger and Panther were works of mechanical art. The Tiger could destroy a Sherman from over 2 kilometers away. Its armor was nearly impervious to the American 75mm gun. On paper, it was the perfect machine. Powerful gun, thick armor, terrifying silhouette, but it was also slow, costly, and temperamental. It broke down often and demanded a small army of technicians and spare parts to stay operational. Only 1,347 Tigers were ever built. By contrast, the United States built nearly 50,000 Shermans American. Doctrine didn't center on tank versus tank duels. It was about mobility and coordination. The Sherman wasn't meant to hunt. Tigers alone, it was one piece, in a vast machine of infantry, artillery, air power, and logistics, working together with relentless speed and pressure. A Panther might win a direct shootout, but Shermans didn't fight fair. They swarmed. They flanked. They called in artillery. They broke bridges behind them and laid mines ahead. As one American tanker put it, "We don't need to outgun them. We just need to outlast them." German officers struggled to understand how Shermans kept showing up after every battle. To them, losing a tank was a logistical nightmare. For Americans, it was Tuesday. They'd planned to outfight the Americans. They hadn't planned to be outbuilt. Inside the machine, how America built 50,000 Shermans, Detroit, Michigan, winter, 1943. Snow fell softly outside the vast hangars of the Detroit tank arsenal. Built inside, it was a different world. Heat, sparks, smoke, and noise. Endless noise. Welding torches hissed like serpents. Pneumatic hammers clanged. Conveyor belts rattled. Engines roared as they were tested and mounted. Over 20,000 workers moved like parts of a living organism. From the foreman shouting over the den, to the line welders hunched over tank holes, to the engine testers drenched in grease and sweat. Each had one goal: build Shermans fast. And they did. By late 1942, this factory alone was producing a completed tank every 28 minutes. What made this miracle possible wasn't just manpower, it was method. The M4 Sherman wasn't designed to be the best tank. It was designed to be the most buildable. Every part was standardized. Turrets, transmissions, wheels, gun sights, even periscopes, all were interchangeable across factories. This meant a turret built in Pittsburgh could be mounted on a hull forged in Cleveland. A transmission from St. Louis could fit into any Sherman in Normandy or North Africa. Parts could be replaced in hours, not days. The German Tiger, by contrast, had over 26 different kinds of bolts, some handmade. If it broke, good luck. By 1944, Sherman production had become a national network. Pressed Steel Car Company in Pennsylvania, Fisher Body in Michigan and Ohio, Lima Locomotive Works in Ohio, American Locomotive Company in New York, even Pacific Car and Foundry on the West Coast factories that once built cars, locomotives, farm equipment, or washing machines. Now they built tanks, and they didn't stop. The role of women. Over 35% of the workforce were women, a number unheard of before the war. Many had never set foot in a factory before Pearl Harbor. Now they wore overalls, carried welding torches, calibrated tools, and signed their names inside armored halls. It wasn't just Rosie the riveter. One worker said it was Rita the gunner site inspector, Gloria the gear machinist, Martha the transmission builder. They worked double shifts. Some brought their children to on-site daycares. They weren't building symbols. They were building survival for their brothers, their husbands, their sons. The numbers don't lie. By the end of the war, American industry had produced 49324 M4 Shermans, 88,000-plus total armored fighting vehicles, over 2.6 million military trucks, 300,000 aircraft, thousands of Liberty ships. In 1943 alone, the U.S. produced more tanks than Germany built in the entire war. One German general, after surrendering in 1945, remarked, "Our tanks were better. Your tanks were there. Shermans didn't travel alone. When a Sherman left Detroit, it didn't just go to the front. It was part of a machine within a machine. Rail depots moved them east. Convoys guarded them across the Atlantic. LST landing ships brought them to the beaches of Europe. Field repair teams and ordnance depots followed close behind recovery vehicles, waited behind every major push. If a Sherman broke down or took damage, it didn't mean the end. It meant pull it back, replace it from inventory if needed, within hours, fix the old one, put it back in the fight. A whole Sherman engine could be swapped in under 3 hours. Tracks 45 minutes if you were fast. A crew that lost its tank in the morning could be back in a new one by nightfall. Luler Jimmy Anderson would later write in a letter home, "They hit us hard near Mortain. Took out my Sherman with a lucky shot. But by that evening we had another one waiting at the depot. Same name painted on the side, just newer." Meanwhile, in Germany, the story was different. German factories were bombed. Supply chains were choked. Skilled labor was sent to the front. Fuel was scarce. Tank production became slower, more fragile, more desperate. The Panther was brilliant, but it took over 150,000 man-H hours to build one. The Tiger, even more. And when one was destroyed, there wasn't another waiting behind it. There was no deep bench, no industrial cushion, just silence, repaired by sunset. The logistics that won the war. Morta, France, August 1944. The sky was bleeding red. Lieutenant Jimmy Anderson's Sherman had been knocked out that morning. A direct hit from a German PaK-40 anti-tank gun had torn through the side armor. The impact tossed Anderson and his crew inside like dice in a cup. They survived barely. The tank didn't. Now, as night approached, they sat in the dust beside the smoking wreck, bruised, sore, but alive. And Anderson was angry, not just because of the tank, but because they had to sit still. That's when the sound came. Diesel engines, big ones. Out of the trees rolled a massive olive-drab beast, an M26 tank recovery vehicle, followed by a flatbed truck, and behind that, a mobile repair unit. One of the mechanics jumped down, looked at the Sherman's twisted chassis, and said flatly, "Yeah, she's cooked, but you'll be rolling by morning." This was the American secret weapon. Not just the tanks, but the ability to fix, swap, and replace them on demand. Recovery crews trained under fire moved out with the front line. They carried spare engines, tracks, tools, welders, even coffee pots. They didn't just pull damaged Shermans off the field. They brought new ones in. There were tactical ordnance depots stationed every few miles behind major advances. If a tank couldn't be recovered, a new one would be set up. If it could be fixed in place, it would be. Some soldiers called it the Ghost Factory. It was as if the battlefield itself could breathe. Latine Anderson's crew got a new Sherman by sunrise. Same model, same gun, same layout. Their loader, Danny, repainted the tank's name, Virginia Vengeance, on the side in chalk before they rolled out. "It wasn't ours," Anderson wrote later, "but it felt like it because the war didn't stop for us. So neither could we." That tank would be hit again 2 weeks later. Same story, same replacement. Sometimes the same tank came back, towed, repaired, recruited. It became a kind of grim game among tankers. See who got their old machine back first. The system wasn't lucky. It was designed from Normandy to Bastonia. Shermans followed an invisible path. First echelon repair units, field crews with spares able to fix minor damage on site. Second echelon mobile depots located 5 to 10 WWII behind the front, with cranes, parts, and full teams. Third echelon ordnance depots, massive logistics hubs 20-plus miles back, where tanks were rebuilt or replaced entirely. Each level fed the one ahead of it. If a crew lost a tank at noon, they might be rearmed and remounted before midnight. German officers couldn't believe it. Captured reports and journals show clear confusion. One major wrote, "We destroyed an entire company of Shermans near Argentinian." Next morning, they attacked again with the same number. Von Richter, still reeling from what he saw near St. Lo, later wrote in his post-war debrief, "We believed American tankers were brave but reckless. Now I see they weren't reckless. They were backed by a machine of endless depth." He wasn't wrong. Germany didn't have anything like this. When a Panther or Tiger was hit, it had to be towed, and many weighed over 45 tons. There were few recovery vehicles strong enough. Their replacement parts were scarce or incompatible. Some tanks were simply abandoned because they couldn't be retrieved in time. Worse, the fuel to move them was running dry. The Shermans kept coming to a German soldier on the front line. It felt supernatural. Burn one, 2 more arrive. Kill Aculum, another replaces it. Every hedge, every road, every forest, another Sherman. It was like fighting a river. One Wehrmacht tank officer would later say, "You could strike it with all your might, and it would still flow around you. Always moving, always there." The Battle of Mortain. We weren't supposed to survive that. Mortain, France, August 7th, 1944. It started just before dawn. A low fog clung to the hills around Morta, muffling every sound, hiding every shadow. Lieutenant Jimmy Anderson's Sherman crept forward along a narrow country road flanked by exhausted infantry. The town had been declared lightly defended. The maps said minor resistance. The maps were wrong. The first shell came in at 5:41 a.m. It didn't whistle. It snapped. A violent, deafening crack, and the lead tank in Anderson's platoon burst into flames. Turret flying sideways like a kicked trash can lid. His driver cursed. The radio came alive. Tiger. Tiger on the ridge. Then the second Sherman was hit. Anderson's crew barely had time to react before their own tank jolted. A sharp metallic bang-a-chode through the cabin. A ricochet. Lucky. But the next one wouldn't be. He shouted orders. Reverse. Reverse, smoke out. Too late. The third shell pierced the lower glasses. The tank rocked hard left. Inside, sparks rained from the controls. The engine stuttered. The lights went dark. They bailed out, one by one, tumbling into the ditch, hearts pounding. Anderson dragged his radio operator by the vest. The tank burned behind them, ammunition cooking off with muffled booms. They had no tank, no cover, no plan. The hill exploded with gunfire. Panzer grenaders, mortar crews, a Tiger tank rumbling through the fog like a dragon made of steel. The Americans were outgunned, outnumbered, and cut off. They fought with rifles, pistols, grenades. They held a stone barn at the edge of a wheat field. It had holes in the roof and 2 dead cows inside. That became their Alamo. 9 hours later, Anderson was out of ammunition and out of ideas. He sat against a broken wall, the weight of smoke, dust, and fear hanging off his shoulders like a lead vest. He looked at his men, faces blackened, eyes hollow, bleeding from knuckles and ears. No medics, nor reinforcements. "We're not getting out of this," his loader whispered. And then they heard it. Engines. At first it was just a hum, distant, barely noticeable over the tinnitus in Anderson's ears. But then it grew louder, deeper, familiar. The low growl of Continental radial engines, the unmistakable rattle of Sherman treads on gravel. Anderson stood, limped toward the doorway, and squinted through the haze. And he saw them, Shermans, dozens, crawling out of the fog like mechanical revenants. The lead tank's turret turned left, fired a H shell that collapsed a German machine gun nest in one shot. Infantry followed close behind, cheering. One of the Shermans had a name painted on its side. Second wind, Anderson laughed, not out of humor, out of disbelief. They sent more, he whispered. They actually sent more. By morning, the counterattack had failed. The Wehrmacht had thrown 8 armored divisions at Morta. Tigers, Panthers, artillery. But the American line held because it refused to break. Every time the Germans knocked out a Sherman, another rolled in. Every time a tank crew was stranded, recovery vehicles and mechanics followed. The Allies didn't have better armor. They had something more dangerous, the power to never stop coming. Anderson's crew got a new tank by nightfall. It was waiting for them at a forward ordnance depot just outside Mortagne. The paint was fresh, the seat cushions were dry, the engine purred like a sleeping giant. Same model, same radio, same hatches. Anderson's gunner, eyes still red from smoke, put a hand on the turret and said, "Feels like home." They named it Virginia Vengeance 2, and they drove it back toward the front the next day. For Anderson, that night became a turning point, not just in the war, in belief. He realized that while German tanks were designed to intimidate, American tanks were built to endure. And in this kind of war, a war of attrition, of mud and movement and logistics, endurance won. The Germans had better machines, he would write later. But we had more. More steel, more fuel, more food, more trucks, more everything. And when it came to Shermans, hell, we had them by the mile. Meanwhile, German officers were beginning to panic. They had believed they could destroy the enemy's armor and collapse the front. Instead, they watched as American tanks replaced themselves like chess pieces on an infinite board. They weren't fighting soldiers. They were fighting a system. Cracks in their on cross. What the Germans saw, August 9th, 1944. Somewhere near Faz-over-Loinant, Hans von Richter sat alone in the turret of his Panzer before engine off, binoculars idle. He was watching a convoy of Shermans, at least 15 crawling over the ridge, where just 2 days earlier his unit had knocked out an entire American platoon. His unit had knocked out an entire American platoon. "They're back already," he whispered. Same place, same formation, different tanks. He checked his maps. The Allied front was growing, not shrinking. His own resupply request for fuel, shells, even basic spare parts, had been delayed for 5 days. His mechanics had to cannibalize wrecked vehicles just to keep the rest running. The enemy, meanwhile, was rotating tanks like fresh horses. Von Richter wrote in his logbook that night, "We no longer fight men. We fight machines. We destroy 1 and 2 more arrive by sundown. It is like cutting heads from a hydra." German High Command was seeing the same thing. Field reports from panzer divisions in Normandy were disturbing. American tank losses are high, but seem to have no operational effect. Shermans continue to appear in sectors previously cleared. "Our forces are facing replenishment cycles we cannot match." One general simply wrote, "Sie haben Lorreserve." They have endless reserves. The myth of German superiority was cracking. For years, Wehrmacht propaganda had painted the German tank corps as the world's finest, engineered perfection rolling across Europe like clockwork. But in Normandy, things were different. The Tiger was a beast, but it broke down constantly and needed a team of specialists. The Panther was feared, but its gearbox failed under stress, and repairs took days. Ammunition was short. Fuel was rationed. Recovery vehicles were few. Worse, they didn't just lose tanks. They couldn't replace them. Germany produced just 1 through 350 Tigers across the entire war. America produced that many Shermans in 2 months. Captured German officers confirmed the shock. In a post-war debrief, one Panzer commander admitted, "We used to believe if we destroyed enough Shermans, the Americans would stop." But they didn't. They just kept sending more. It was like they had factories floating offshore. They weren't far off. Behind every Allied tank push was a sea of ships, trucks, depots, and personnel. The Shermans didn't just arrive, they arrived with everything they needed to survive. One Wehrmacht staff planner in an intercepted memo described the U.S. logistical model as a form of war production beyond calculation. It cannot be bombed, it cannot be flanked, it simply feeds itself. Even elite German tankers began to break. Veterans of the Eastern Front, men who'd survived Kursk and Kharkov, were now retreating. Not because they'd been defeated in a tank duel, but because they'd run out of tanks entirely. In one account, a Tiger commander near Argentine described being ordered to hold a crossroads with 3 functioning vehicles. "We destroyed 7 Shermans that day," he said. By nightfall, they had more than when they began. "We had fewer." He shook his head and added, "There was no point anymore. We were punching the ocean." The realization crept in slowly, but it hit hard. Germany wasn't just losing the war. They were being outproduced, outpaced, outlasted, and every Sherman that rolled up to the front was a reminder. This wasn't just a tank. It was a symptom of something much larger. A nation whose factories could turn steel into firepower at a speed Hitler's Reich could never dream of. The system wins when quality couldn't keep up. By late August 1944, the German dream of halting the Allied advance in France was dead. The Falaise pocket had collapsed. Over 50,000 German troops were killed or captured. The roads out of Normandy were littered with twisted wrecks. Not just tanks, but hopes. Tiger tanks, once symbols of unstoppable force, lay gutted and burning. Panthers sat abandoned on the roadside, their crews out of fuel, or simply too exhausted to continue. And all the while, the Shermans kept rolling. One U.S. officer described it best. "We'd lose 4 or 5 in a fight, and we hated it. But the next day, we had 6 new ones. We didn't win by invincibility. We won by never going away." The myth of German technological superiority had run into a wall. Not a stronger gun, but a better system. Germany had bet everything on superweapons. Tanks with unmatched armor and firepower. Jet fighters ahead of their time. Rockets capable of hitting London from across the Channel. But they had failed to build the one thing war truly demands: scale. A tank is not just a weapon. It's a promise that when one falls, another stands ready. And America kept that promise. Sherman versus Tiger. On paper, it wasn't a fair fight. A Tiger could destroy a Sherman before the American crew even saw it. But war isn't fought on paper, because for every Tiger Germany fielded, America could deploy 20 Shermans. Not 1-on-1, 20-on. And even then, the Tiger had to work. It had to move. It had to survive. The Sherman only had to arrive. In a field depot outside Rams, Lieutenant Anderson watched as mechanics worked on a fresh shipment of tanks. One crew swapped out an engine block in 2 hours flat. Another repainted hole markings. Another tested radios. It was like NASCAR, he said. You blink and the tank's ready. He ran his hand along the turret of his latest Sherman, Virginia Vengeance III. His 3rd tank in 3 months, and still he felt lucky. Meanwhile, von Richter stood before his last 2 operational panzers. His request for fuel had gone unanswered. His mechanics were gone. His men were tired, scared. He looked across the field and saw the dust cloud. More Shermans. Not beautiful, not elegant, but inevitable. "It's not that their tanks are better," he said to his adjutant. "It's that they don't run out." In the final analysis, what defeated the German army wasn't just Allied bravery or firepower or air supremacy. It was industrial democracy, a nation that turned refrigerators into tank holes, that turned typewriter factories into gun foundries. That trained a nation of mechanics to keep the war machine humming mile after mile, month after month. And that's what the Sherman really was. Not just a tank, a declaration. You may knock us down, but we'll be back by morning, and we'll bring more. Lessons in steel. What the Sherman taught the world. May 1945, Germany surrenders across Europe. Tanks sat silent. Some were burned out in hedge, others rusted in fields where the fighting had passed them by. Panthers with their hatches open like broken jaws. Tigers stripped for parts by desperate crews. Panzers whose treads had snapped long before the Reich did. And in towns newly liberated, Shermans rolled through, dusty, dented, often patched up with makeshift armor, but moving, still moving. That was the legacy of the M4 Sherman. It never stopped. After the war, analysts from every nation studied the tank campaigns of World War II. They pored over duels, kill ratios, designs, technical specifications, and, at first, the numbers favored Germany. In one-on-one confrontations, German tanks often won. But that wasn't the whole story, because war is not a laboratory. War is about momentum, about logistics, replenishment, and the ability to return a weapon to battle again and again. As General Omar Bradley once remarked, the American soldier didn't always carry the best weapon, but he always had enough of them. The Sherman became the template for modern warfare, not because it was the strongest, but because it could be produced quickly, repaired easily, shipped efficiently, and replaced without delay. It proved that uniformity outperforms complexity, that maintainability can be a weapon, and that availability outweighs theoretical superiority. Today, armored forces across the US and NATO still embody those principles. Modular designs, rapid mobility, scalable manufacturing. The Sherman was the first true tank built for the industrial era of conflict, and it transformed warfare forever. For the men who fought, the lesson was more personal. They remembered the fire, the wrecks, the faces they lost, but they also remembered coming back. Jimmy Anderson made it home. 3 Shermans lost, dozens of comrades buried. Yet he survived, started a family, and became a history teacher. On his bookshelf sat a small green model tank, a Sherman marked Virginia Vengeance 4. When his grandson once asked if the Sherman was a good tank, Anderson paused, then smiled softly. "It wasn't the best," he said, "but it was there when we needed it, and that made it good enough." The tank that refused to die. 20 years later, 1965, in a quiet military museum near Stuttgart, a group of students gathered to hear an aging German officer speak. His name was Hans von Richter. Older now, his hair white, his movements slow, but his eyes still sharp. A veteran of 2 fronts, a man who once believed the Tiger was the ultimate weapon of war. When asked which weapon frightened him most, he didn't name the 88mm gun, the Allied bombers, or even the atomic bomb. He exhaled and said, "The Sherman, not because it was stronger, but because it never stopped coming." He paused, his voice quieter. It wasn't just a tank. It was a symbol of factories, of laborers, of ships and roads, and of countless people we never saw, all moving as one. That's what defeated us. The tank was only its face. Somewhere, a boy stands at the grave of Lieutenant James Anderson, who died in 1962. In his small hand, he holds a metal toy Sherman. He sets it gently on the headstone. His father kneels beside him and reads the inscription aloud. He served. He returned. He served. He returned.